For the past 9 years, I have been tracking real estate markets most Americans have never heard of. Places where you can use your US passport, spend US dollars, and buy property without the visa headaches or foreign ownership restrictions that make overseas real estate a legal nightmare. While everyone is bidding against hedge funds for overpriced condos in Florida and Arizona, I have been quietly watching territories and protectorates where property sits available, affordable, and almost completely ignored. Number 4 is a Caribbean island where waterfront land goes for less than a used Honda, and you will never need to deal with customs when you fly home. The frustrating part is not that these places exist. The frustrating part is how few Americans even know they are an option. Back in 2019, I watched retirees panic buy in Belize and Costa Rica, dealing with residency lawyers and currency exchange nightmares, while a U.S. territory with better infrastructure and lower property taxes sat empty 2 time zones away. Same benefits, zero immigration paperwork, and nobody was looking. If you want to know where Americans can actually buy property without leaving American jurisdiction, and why almost none of them do, you are in the right place. Hit subscribe right now because this kind of information does not show up in mainstream retirement guides. Item 12. American Samoa. Most people could not find American Samoa on a map if you gave them 3 tries and a hint. That is exactly why it matters. This is not Samoa, the independent nation. This is American Samoa, the unincorporated territory, and the distinction is critical because one is a foreign country and the other is under U.S. sovereignty. Here is what nobody tells you. American Samoa has some of the strictest land ownership laws in any U.S. territory. If you are not of Samoan descent, you cannot own land. You can lease it long-term, but you cannot buy it outright. That sounds like a deal-breaker until you understand the leasehold system they actually use. You can secure a 55-year lease with renewal options that functionally give you the same control as ownership for less than what a down payment costs in most mainland suburbs. I am talking $30,000 to $50,000 for oceanfront lease rights that would cost you 7 figures in Hawaii. The reason nobody does this is cultural sensitivity and lack of information. The territory has actively discouraged speculative investment from outsiders, and most real estate websites do not even list American Samoa properties because the legal framework is unfamiliar. But if you are willing to work within a communal land system and respect the fast Samoa way of life, you can live on some of the most beautiful coastline in the Pacific for a fraction of what Maui or Kauai would run you. I spoke to a retired engineer in 2021 who moved to American Samoa on a long-term lease in the village of Onu. He pays $480 a year in lease fees. His build costs ran about $85,000 for a small but modern 2-bedroom structure with solar panels and rainwater collection. Total all-in cost over 5 years, including the lease and construction, was under $110,000. He has high-speed internet through the ASG broadband project. He files his taxes the same way he always did because it is a U.S. territory, and his healthcare is handled through the LBJ Tropical Medical Center in Pago Pago, which accepts Medicare. The trade-off is isolation. There are no direct flights from the mainland. You are connecting through Honolulu on a limited schedule and the cultural adjustment is real. This is not a retirement enclave full of expats. You are living in a tight-knit Samoan community, and if you are not willing to integrate and contribute, you will not be welcome. But if you want affordability, beauty, and a slower pace of life under the American flag, American Samoa is still available. And almost nobody knows it. Item 11. The Northern Mariana Islands. Saipan, Tinian, Rota. These islands sit just north of Guam in the western Pacific, and while Guam gets all the attention and all the development money, the Northern Mariana Islands remain weirdly overlooked. You can buy property here as a U.S. citizen with no restrictions, full fee simple ownership, the same legal structure as buying a house in Ohio. A single-family home on Saipan within a 15-minute drive of the beach runs between $150,000 and $275,000 depending on age and condition. Beachfront lots start around $80,000. I am not talking about landlocked scrub parcels. I am talking about titled lots with ocean views where you can build what you want. Compare that to even the most remote parts of the Florida Panhandle or the Outer Banks, and it is not even close. Here is the story nobody tells. In the 1980s and 1990s, Saipan had a construction boom tied to Japanese tourism. Hotels went up, golf courses were built, and the population swelled. Then the garment industry collapsed in the early 2000s, Japanese tourism shifted to other markets, and the economy stalled. A lot of properties were built and then abandoned or undersold. That inventory is still sitting there, and sellers are motivated. I am talking about concrete homes with tile roofs, 3 bedrooms, carports, and functioning utilities listed for under $200,000 in markets where comparable builds would be $450,000 in California or Hawaii. The challenge is jobs and connectivity. If you are retired or working remotely, this is a non-issue. If you need local employment, opportunities are limited unless you are in education, healthcare, or government work. Flights to the mainland require a connection through Guam, Tokyo, or Seoul. It is not a quick trip, but the infrastructure is solid. You have power, water, internet through IT&E and PTI, grocery stores that stock American brands, and a legal system that operates under U.S. federal law. I know a couple who bought a 2-bedroom house in Cobblerville for $185,000 in 2020. They gutted the interior, added solar panels, updated the kitchen, and now they have a home worth at least $240,000 based on recent comparables. Their property tax bill last year was $320. Their homeowner's insurance, which includes typhoon coverage, runs about $1,100 annually. They fly back to California twice a year to see family, and the rest of the time they are 10 minutes from Micro Beach, paying less in monthly housing costs than they were paying for a 1-bedroom apartment in San Jose. The Northern Marianas are not a secret, they are just ignored, and if you are fine with distance and you do not need a bustling social scene, that is an advantage. Item 10. Guam. Guam is the only U.S. territory in this list that most Americans have actually heard of, usually because they know someone stationed at Andersen Air Force Base or they have seen it on a map during a Pacific typhoon. What they do not know is that Guam has a functioning real estate market where U.S. citizens can buy property the same way they would in any state. Prices are higher than the Northern Marianas, but still significantly below Hawaii. A modest 3-bedroom house in Dedito or Yigo runs between $280,000 and $400,000. Beachfront is more, but even oceanfront condos in Tuman are listing in the $350,000 to $550,000 range, which is what you would pay for a landlocked townhouse in Orange County. Here is what makes Guam different. It is actual infrastructure. The island has Home Depot, Kmart, Payless supermarkets, a full-service hospital in the Guam Memorial Hospital, and a private facility in Guam Regional Medical City, high-speed internet through GTA and Docomo, and regular flights to Honolulu, Manila, Tokyo, and Seoul. If you want the benefits of a U.S. territory without feeling like you have left modern civilization, Guam delivers. The military presence stabilizes the economy in a way that is not true for other territories. Andersen Air Force Base and Naval Base Guam are not going anywhere. That means federal jobs, contractor work, and a built-in customer base for local businesses. It also means the real estate market has a floor. Even during downturns, property values hold because there is always demand from military families and contractors cycling through. The downside is the same thing that makes it stable. It is crowded and expensive relative to the other options on this list. Guam feels more like suburban sprawl than a tropical hideaway. Traffic is real. The cost of living is higher because almost everything is imported, and because it is a known quantity, you are not getting the deals you would find in less discovered territories. I talked to a retired Air Force officer who bought a condo in Tamuning in 2018 for $320,000. He rents it out when he is traveling and stays there during the winter months. His rental income covers his mortgage, HOA fees, and property taxes, and he basically has a free winter residence in the Pacific. His HOA runs $340 a month, property tax is around $1,400 annually, and the condo is a 5-minute walk from Ipao Beach. He told me his only regret was not buying 2 units. Guam is the least risky option on this list, which is exactly why it is also the least affordable. But if you want U.S. amenities with Pacific weather and you are willing to pay a bit more for convenience, it works. Item 9. The U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix. Everyone knows about the U.S. Virgin Islands in theory. What they do not know is that St. Croix, the largest and least touristy of the 3 main islands, has property available at prices that would shock most coastal buyers. We are not talking about St. Thomas, where cruise ships unload thousands of tourists daily and waterfront homes start at $1 million. We are talking about St. Croix, where you can still find single-family homes for under $250,000 and buildable lots for under $50,000. St. Croix took a beating from Hurricane Maria in 2017, and parts of the island are still recovering. That is precisely why there are deals. Sellers are motivated, investors got spooked, and the homes that have been rebuilt or updated are being listed at a discount compared to what they would cost on St. Thomas or St. John. I have seen three-bedroom houses in Fredericksted with ocean views listed at $210,000, not teardowns. Actual livable homes with updated kitchens and hurricane-rated windows. The tax incentives are real and they are significant. The U.S. Virgin Islands offers economic development programs that reduce your income tax burden if you establish residency and start a business. Some people are paying 4% on income that would be taxed at 24% on the mainland. You still file with the IRS, but your tax home is the USVI, and the savings can be massive if you structure it correctly. I am not a tax advisor, but I know people who moved their consulting businesses to St. Croix and cut their annual tax bills by $30,000. Here is the catch: the job market is limited, healthcare is inconsistent, and crime is higher than most retirees expect. Christiansted has a hospital, but for anything serious, you are medevac to Puerto Rico or Miami. Power outages are common, especially during storm season. And while the island is beautiful, the infrastructure is fragile. You need to be the kind of person who can handle inconvenience without panicking. I know a freelance writer who bought a house in the hills above Christiansted for $190,000 in 2019. She gutted it, added a cistern and solar panels, and now she works remotely from a covered porch overlooking the Caribbean. Her property tax is about $950 a year. Her electric bill, even with air conditioning, runs about $180 a month thanks to the solar setup. She has high-speed internet through broadband VI, and she flies back to the mainland 4 times a year. Her total cost of living, including mortgage, utilities, insurance, and food, is under $2,400 a month. She told me she will never move back. St. Croix is not for everyone, but if you can handle the trade-offs and you know how to navigate the tax benefits, it is one of the best deals in U.S. jurisdiction. Item 8. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the most populated U.S. territory and the most well-known, but that does not mean Americans are buying there in the numbers you would expect. After Hurricane Maria in 2017, and the debt crisis that followed, property values dropped and have stayed low in many areas outside of San Juan. You can buy a concrete house in the Central Mountains for under $100,000. You can find beachfront land on the northwest coast for under $60,000. And because it is a U.S. territory, you are buying with the same legal protections and financing options as anywhere stateside. The tax incentives in Puerto Rico are the most aggressive in any U.S. jurisdiction. Act 60, which combined and updated previous tax programs, allows new residents to pay 0% capital gains tax on assets acquired after they move, 4% on business income, and 0 on dividends and interest. If you're selling a business, cashing out stock, or running a remote company, the savings are enormous. We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax savings for high earners who are willing to spend at least 183 days a year on the island. Here is what the influencers do not tell you: the power grid is unreliable. Luma Energy has been managing the system since 2021, and outages are still frequent, especially in rural areas. If you are off the metro area, you need a generator and a backup plan. Medical care in San Juan is excellent. Outside of San Juan, it is hit or miss. The crime rate is higher than the mainland average, and you need to be smart about where you buy. Some neighborhoods are safe and well-maintained. Others are not. I talked to a software engineer who moved to Rincon in 2020 under Act 60. He bought a 2-bedroom house 3 blocks from the beach for $140,000. He added a whole house generator, a cistern, and a Starlink setup as backup internet. His property tax is about $600 annually. His savings on federal income tax in his first full year of residency was just over $40,000. He kiteboards in the morning, works from home in the afternoon, and told me he has no plans to ever go back to Austin. Puerto Rico works if you are high income and can handle inconsistency. If you need everything to work perfectly all the time, this is not your spot. But if you can trade convenience for tax savings and beach access, it is hard to beat. Item 7. U.S. Minor Outlying Islands. Wake Island. This one is a technicality, but it is worth understanding. Wake Island is an unincorporated U.S. territory in the Central Pacific, about 2/3 of the way between Honolulu and Guam. It is administered by the Air Force, and there is no permanent civilian population. You cannot buy property here because there is no property market. Everything on the island is federally controlled. So why is it on this list? Because it represents a category of U.S. territory that most people do not even know exists. The U.S. minor outlying islands include Wake Island, Midway Atoll, Johnston Atoll, and a handful of others. They are all restricted access. Most are wildlife refuges or military installations, but they are still U.S. soil and technically U.S. law applies. The reason I bring this up is to illustrate how much U.S.-controlled land exists that the average American has never thought about. If you are researching territorial real estate, you will come across references to these islands, and it is important to know upfront that they are not available for private ownership. Do not waste time trying to figure out how to buy on Midway. You cannot. But the existence of these islands does remind you of how much geography the United States controls beyond the 50 states. And some of that geography, like the next few entries on this list, is absolutely available if you know where to look. Item 6. Navassa Island. Navassa is a small, uninhabited island between Jamaica and Haiti. It is a U.S. territory, claimed under the Guano Islands Act of 1856. It is administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a national wildlife refuge, and there is no public access. You cannot visit without federal permission, and you definitely cannot buy land there. So why include it? Because Navassa is a perfect example of how weird and obscure U.S. territorial law can get. This is a Caribbean island that is legally part of the United States that Haiti also claims and that almost no American has ever heard of. It has no people, no buildings, and no infrastructure. It exists in legal limbo managed by the Department of the Interior, and unless you are a biologist studying seabirds, you will never set foot on it. The point is this: when you start digging into U.S. territories and how they are classified, you realize how many strange gaps and opportunities exist in the system. Navassa is not one of those opportunities, but it is a reminder that the list of U.S.-controlled land is longer and weirder than most people think. And some of those places, unlike Navassa, are absolutely available for private ownership. You just have to know which ones. Item 5. Palmyra Atoll. Palmyra is an incorporated U.S. territory in the Central Pacific, about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. It is one of the only incorporated territories that is not a state, which gives it a unique legal status. It is privately owned by the Nature Conservancy, and it is managed as a research station and wildlife refuge. There is no permanent population, and there is no way for a private individual to buy land there. But here is what makes Palmyra interesting. Because it is an incorporated territory, the full U.S. Constitution applies. That is not true for most of the other territories on this list. In unincorporated territories like Guam or Puerto Rico, only certain parts of the Constitution apply unless Congress says otherwise. Palmyra, on paper, has the same constitutional protections as California. Not that it matters for real estate purposes. You still cannot buy there, but it is worth understanding the distinction because it affects how laws work in other territories. If you are looking at property in an unincorporated territory, you need to check what rights and protections actually apply. Do not assume that because it is U.S. soil, every rule works the same way. I have never met anyone who has been to Palmyra outside of researchers with Nature Conservancy access. It is pristine, remote, and completely off-limits to private ownership. But it is a useful case study in how territorial law works, and it reminds you to do your homework before you assume a U.S. territory operates the same way as a U.S. state. Item 4. Kingman Reef. Kingman Reef is another Pacific atoll located northwest of Palmyra. It is an unincorporated U.S. territory, and like Palmyra, it is a wildlife refuge with no human population and no private property. It is mostly underwater at high tide with just a few coral ridges breaking the surface. You cannot buy it, you cannot visit it without federal clearance, and unless you are deeply interested in coral ecosystems or migratory bird populations, you have no reason to care about it. So why is it on this list? Because when you start searching for U.S. territories where you can buy property, Kingman Reef and places like it show up in the results, and people waste time trying to figure out if there is some loophole or some special access program. There is not. These islands are federal refuges. They are not real estate markets. I am listing them here so you do not waste 3 hours going down a rabbit hole that leads nowhere. The takeaway is simple. Not every U.S. territory is available. Some are military bases. Some are wildlife preserves. Some are just rocks in the ocean with a flag on them. The ones that matter for real estate are Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa under specific conditions. Everything else is either off-limits or functionally inaccessible. Item 3. Bajo Nuevo Bank and Serenilla Bank. These are 2 underwater reefs in the Caribbean that the United States claims under the Guano Islands Act, even though Colombia and Jamaica also have claims. They are not inhabited. There is no land above water except during low tide. There is no infrastructure, no property market, and no realistic way to do anything with them. I am including them on this list because they represent the absolute extreme of obscure U.S. territorial claims. These are places that exist on maps, that are technically under U.S. jurisdiction depending on who you ask, and that serve zero practical purpose for anyone looking to buy property. If someone tries to sell you a stake in Bajo Nuevo Bank, you are being scammed. The reason these claims exist at all is historical. The Guano Islands Act allowed U.S. citizens to claim uninhabited islands for guano mining, which was valuable in the 1800s for fertilizer. A lot of those claims were never formally resolved, so you end up with reefs and rocks scattered across the Caribbean and Pacific that are technically U.S. territories but have no meaningful administration or legal infrastructure. The lesson here is to ignore the noise. If it is not a place where people live, where there is a functioning government, and where property transactions actually happen, it is not relevant. Stick to the inhabited territories with real markets. Everything else is trivia. Item 2. Johnston Atoll. Johnston Atoll is a former nuclear test site and chemical weapons disposal facility in the Central Pacific. It was used by the military for decades, and it is now a wildlife refuge managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There is no public access. You cannot buy property there, you cannot even visit without specific federal authorization. It is about 800 miles southwest of Hawaii, and at one point it had a population of over 1,000 military and contractor personnel. Now it has zero. The airstrip is still there, but it is not in use. The whole atoll is contaminated from decades of weapons testing and cleanup operations, and it is not going to be open to the public in our lifetime. So why talk about it? Because Johnston represents the kind of U.S. territory that shows up when you search for land options and immediately disqualifies itself. It is a reminder to focus on territories with civilian populations, functioning infrastructure, and legal frameworks that allow private ownership. If the place you are researching was a nuclear test site or a weapons depot, move on. The territories that actually matter for real estate are the ones where people live, work, and build communities. That is Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, the Northern Marianas, and under the right conditions, American Samoa. Everything else is either a military base, a wildlife refuge, or a legal fiction. Do not get distracted. Item 1. Howland Island, Baker Island, and Jarvis Island. Here is the number 1 entry, and it is a perfect illustration of how strange and useless some U.S. territorial claims are. Howland, Baker, and Jarvis are 3 tiny uninhabited islands in the Central Pacific. They are all national wildlife refuges. They have no people, no infrastructure, and no property market. Howland Island is famous for one thing. It is near where Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937. That is it. That is the only reason most people have heard of it. You cannot buy land on any of these islands. You cannot visit them without a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and those permits are almost never granted unless you are a researcher. There is no water, no power, no buildings, just coral, sand, and seabirds. So why is this number 1? Because it represents the most extreme version of a mistake I see people make over and over. They hear U.S. territory and they assume opportunity. They think there must be some way to claim land, to homestead, to buy cheap property that nobody else knows about, and they waste weeks researching places that were never available to begin with. Howland, Baker, and Jarvis are not real estate opportunities. They are wildlife refuges on remote Pacific atolls that exist mostly on paper. They are U.S. territories in name only. There is no local government, no legal infrastructure, no way to own or develop anything. They are the ultimate dead end. The reason I put this at number 1 is to drive home the most important point in this entire video. The only U.S. territories where you can actually buy property as a private citizen are Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and under specific lease arrangements, American Samoa. Everything else is either a federal reserve, a military installation, or a reef with a flag. Do not waste time on anything outside that list. I have watched people spend months researching obscure island claims, reading old Guano Act filings, trying to figure out if there is some backdoor way to acquire land on a Pacific atoll. There is not. If it is not administered by a civilian government, if it does not have people living there, and if it does not have a functioning property system, it does not matter. The real opportunity is not in finding some secret island nobody knows about. The real opportunity is in recognizing that the 5 legitimate options I just gave you are already being ignored by 99% of Americans. You do not need a hidden loophole. You just need to act on what is already available while everyone else is still trying to figure out if they can afford a condo in Sarasota. Here is what you now know that most people do not. There are 5 U.S. territories where you can buy property with the same legal protections, the same currency, and the same passport you already have. Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa under long-term lease. The prices are lower. The taxes in some cases are dramatically lower. The infrastructure ranges from solid to inconsistent, but it exists, and almost nobody is looking. While everyone else is getting outbid in Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina by investors and hedge funds, you now have a list of places where the competition is thin, the deals are real, and you never have to deal with a foreign government. You are still on U.S. soil. You are still under U.S. law. You just happen to be paying a third of what you would pay stateside. Drop a comment right now and tell me which territory you are seriously considering. I read every single one and I want to know where you are looking. Next video I am breaking down the 5 biggest mistakes retirees make when they buy overseas property, including one that can get your purchase invalidated years after you close. You do not want to miss it.